House. Today, we are presenting the path from JCI to SCI-Expanded, which will allow you to explore your journal performance, presented by Mary McVeigh and Tom Chiavarella. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your control panel, and we will bring them up with our speakers at the last 20 minutes of the meeting. And I'd also like to remind you that a recorded version of this webinar will be available on Galenos YouTube channel. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Mary McVeigh. She will describe how JCI was created and how it is calculated, compare JCI to impact factor, and show how JCI can compare journals across categories. Then Tom Chiavarella will review the editorial criteria for journal quality that leads to JCI. So please welcome Mary McVeigh.
Thank you. Okay, now I have to try to share my screen.
Okay.
We'll see if I can get. Did I do that in one?
Yes, let's see.
Okay. Is excellent. Okay, I want to give you an overview of the Journal Citation Indicator, as well as some aspects of how we see that contributing to what was essentially a quite new JCR this year, 2021, after many years where we used essentially the same information and the same metrics. We have been on a 4-year journey of some radical innovations, and this was one of them, but this was tied to some other very critical things that we've developed. Whenever I speak about the JCR, whoops, yes, I do have the proper slide. Whenever I speak about the JCR, I really want to put it in context of what this product really is, because I think although everyone has heard of it, there are a few people who really understand what its intention was. This quote is from Eugene Garfield in 1975. This was almost the opening of his introduction to the first release of the Journal Citation Reports. That first release was literally bound within the covers of the Science Citation Index that year, the 1964 summary data of the Science Citation Index. The Journal Citation Reports was the final volume. It was considered at the time not a separate entity or even a separate way of thinking about the data. It was a summary at the journal level of the article citation network that created the Science Citation Index. And we want to still think of it that way, that there is a dynamic and necessary relationship between article performance and journal performance. And by re-embedding the JCR in the context of the Web of Science, we're trying to encourage that dynamic. So I want to read this quote. A citation index is based on the principle that there is some meaningful relationship between one paper and some other that it cites or that cites it, and thus between the work of the two authors or two groups of authors who publish the papers. What we really want to think about is the fact that the citation network is created by the researchers in the process of collaborating and communicating with one another through their published works. The original JCR contained 2,400 journals from the Science Citation Index, and at the time it used punch cards and magnetic tapes to analyze 4.2 million cited references. Over time, we've changed a lot of things about the content that we use, but never the principles that underlie the creation of our citation indexes, which are now the Web of Science core collection, and the Journal Citation Reports. The 2020 JCR, in contrast to that first year, contained over 21,000 journals, 150 million citations, just to create the one-year data for the journal impact factors. And including the JCI, we now have close to 600 million cited references analyzed for a single year's production of the JCR. That's a way bigger network than we've ever had before. But the thing that has not changed is that the JCR and all of those metrics begin in the citation indexes. So I'm going to just tip my hand towards Tom, who's going to talk more about these criteria, and say that the reason the JCR matters and the reason our metrics are reliable is that we evaluate collections, which are the impact collections, which are the Science Citation Index Expanded, Social Sciences Citation Index, and Arts and Humanities Citation Index. You will have all of these slides through Tom at the end, so you can use and navigate the links. I want to cover the new things in the 2021 release. First of all, the expanded content, because that is critical to understanding the JCI and why we've released the JCI and where we see it fitting into this set of data, because the expanded content became possible because we were able to calculate that JCI. The journal citation reports this year added not just the Science Citation Index Expanded and the Social Sciences Citation Index journals, the SCIE and SSCI. We included the other flagship collection, the Arts and Humanities Citation Index, which added an additional 1,300 titles, as well as the Emerging Sources Citation Index, which added 7,200 new titles to the JCR listings. Those titles, ANHCI and ESCI, had always been part of the citation contribution to the journal citation reports, but they are now appearing with journal profile pages. The JCR coverage of the journal literature now reflects the full breadth of the research covered in all the journals in the Web of Science core collection. All of the journals in our collection have met the rigorous quality criteria that is applied by our expert in-house editors. And that means that they have earned, or that they warrant their place in these critical citation indexes that we present. All of their content is trustworthy, and the Web of Science selected journals merit complete coverage now in the JCR. The ANHCI and ESCI journals do not have a journal impact factor calculated, but every journal in the JCR will now have the Journal Citation Indicator calculated to the degree that the data can support that calculation. Minor point, a very few journals will not have sufficient data to calculate the metric. All of the journal literature is now appearing in this critical reference work, the Journal Citation Reports. What I found for Galenos is that from 2 journals which are listed in the SCIE and in last year's Journal Citation Reports, there are now 17 journals listed in the JCR, all of the journals that are selected in any one of our citation indexes. What this gives, more broadly, what this gives our users is a way to see the much richer and broader set of data that represents the Web of Science citation network, and not just the top journals that are represented in the flagship collections. So what is the Journal Citation Indicator? Since it has enabled this vast expansion of the JCR, let's dive in a little into what it is. The JCI data are derived from the same extraction, analysis, and unification process that creates the rest of the JCR, including our new policy on early access inclusion. The difference is that we expanded the number of years we use in extracting citations from 1 year, which is a traditional JCR journal impact factor extraction, and we now included 4 years of citations from 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. We take those citations and analyze all of the citations that are linked only to articles and reviews in the covered journals. That means only those items that are identified as the scholarly contribution of the journal to the literature, and therefore part of those meaningful relationships in the scholarly network. Yes, so that is any journal, book, and conference proceeding in the core collection, including all of the SCIE, ESCI, ANHCI, and SSCI journals. They had always been part of the JCR, and all journals, books, and conference proceedings are now also part of that contribution. in order to create a metric that was scalable across different categories where there are known differences in the citation behavior, both by time and by type, what we used was a series of field, type, and topic normalizations that allow the metric to be far more comparable. In effect, we're comparing an article to a similar article and saying, of all the articles of this type and of this age and in this topic, what is the performance of this individual article? That would be the category normalized citation indicator that is calculated in the Insights database. To summarize that at the journal level, we then average that across the journal itself for those 3 cited years. We know in general that a review will be more cited than an article, so we only compare articles to other articles and reviews to other reviews. We know that an older document, a document that has been published some years back, 3 years back, 2 years back, 1 year back, we know that the older document will have a greater likelihood of achieving citation, so we only compare 2017 documents to 2017 documents. It is also very well known that topics in arts and humanities or in social sciences or in engineering and other applied fields will show a lesser overall citation activity. So we have now further normalized to compare topic to topic. So we use those 3 non-quality identifiers on the articles, on the items, and we use those to normalize the expected citation performance. So for any article that is 3 years old in the biochemistry category and is an article, not a review, we're only comparing it to that same population of materials. Mathematically, the Journal Citation Indicator pulls all those citable items. It compares their citation count in the JCI window to the calculated expected citation count. That is then averaged across all of the papers in the journal. How is the JCI displayed? I hope you have had some chance to take a look at the JCR this year. If not, I'm going to give you a quick look. For an SCIE journal, there will be the journal impact factor and all of the new transparency in and around the journal impact factor. But we also have the JCI as a multi-year metric. It's available in our Browse by Journals to sort, filter, and rank. For all journals in the JCI will be displayed as this multi-year trend, 1, 2, 3, and 4 years, depending on the depth of coverage. All journals in the JCR will have a rank by JCI in category. Roughly speaking, it looks quite similar to the rank by journal impact factor, but the population of journals receiving a JCI is significantly larger. Now here I've pulled up this journal, Journal of Clinical Research in Pediatric Endocrinology, and show that the pediatrics category has 176 total journals in the JCR. Here is another journal, also in the pediatrics category. This journal has been only in the Emerging Sources Citation Index. It is also showing a multi-year JCI calculation, and it is also showing its relative rank in 176 pediatrics journals. So the rank by JCI will not be the count of journals that have a journal impact factor. It will be the larger count of journals that have a JCI metric in the JCR. And you also see that, I'll get back to that. I was going to go into the relative ranking of the SCIE journal versus the ESCI journal, but I think we have some other things on that later. For ESCI and ANHCI journals, this new metric will be the primary element of journal performance, but there is a large number of other materials that are presented on that journal profile page, so that the JCR becomes an information source about many aspects of journal performance, not just journal citation. I wanted to give you a quick look at some of the other features of the page on from this ESCI journal. We have an open access comparison. Given the Galenos journals are all open access, that's a little less interesting than some journals where they have a much more integrated mix. But what that would also allow you is you would get a look at competitor journals and similar journals in your category and get this full look at how they're managing their open access content and the relative citation performance of that open access content. Here, I've also pulled in the rank by the JCI just because it happened to be in the middle of the page that way. This is one of my favorite and largely unappreciated features of the JCR, and that is we display the full journal-to-journal citation network that creates this journal citation environment. What journals are referenced by the Journal of Pediatric Research? You may know that as the publisher, but can you see all the journals that reference you and all the journals that reference a competitor or are referenced by a competitor? What other journals in the Web of Science are creating this level of citation for your journal? And how is that distributed across time? I really would encourage using these data and taking a close look at where these materials are creating the network of readers and referencers that live around your journal and that create this web of meaningful relationships. We also have general information about the content of the journal, its category, contributions by organization, as well as by country and region. Again, while you may know these materials about your own journal, this will also give you a context for all of the journals that contribute to your reference network. We have also added the eigenfactor metrics, the eigenfactor score itself, a normalized eigenfactor, and the article citation score. These are some advanced network-based metrics that we created or added to the JCR. Oh, it's a good 15 years ago now. I want to point out as well that we have included the JCI in the master journal list, which is a freely available public resource. So this provides subscribers, but also non-subscribers with this basic information about the 2-year trend for this journal in the JCI calculation. All calculated JCI values for 2020 and 2019 are now freely available to anyone in the world. JCR subscribers, if the journal has a journal impact factor, they would also see that value displayed in the master journal list if they're logged in for the 2020 and 2019. I include a link so that you can go try this out. Why do we use the JCI? I think I put that very much in the question of normalization. The journal impact factor is a ratio of citations received in 1 year to 2 previous years, and it is scaled only for the size of the journal's scholarly content, not all the content in the journal. And it also doesn't include distinctions according to the characteristics of the field, like that field normalization in the JCI. The age normalization and the field normalization are not part of the JC journal impact factor. They are part of the JCI. They're not part of the journal impact factor. The journal impact factor is only normalized by size, and that's why when you look at the distribution of journal impact factor values for the SCIE and the SSCI, you see that the SCIE journals have a higher average journal impact factor and journals that are in the much higher register up here. For social sciences journals, because the fields themselves have different citation characteristics by size and topic and age as well, you see that the SSCI has an average journal impact factor in 2020 of 2.6. When we do internal calculations of the estimated journal impact factor of the arts and humanities, it's down to 0.5, where nearly 40% of the journals have a value at 0.5. And that is way too low to provide a distinction between journals that have significantly different citation performance. Because ESCI journals are not selected based on competitive citation metrics, they also generally show a much lower value in the estimated journal impact factor. Again, with a large number of the journals having very, very low estimated journal impact factors. The JIF is best adapted to fields with a high source output and a large reference count. So average numbers of references in the SSCI journals versus the SCIE journals versus the SSCI journals. There are very significant differences in the way that they reference material, both its age and the volume of reference. So JIF works best for the sciences It works adequately for the social sciences, especially insofar as they kind of integrate very effectively with the sciences, but it's not a metric designed to show the citation characteristics of a much different literature like the arts and humanities. If you look at the distribution of JCI values in the 2020 JCR, you see that these three flagship indexes have much more similar curves, as well as similar values. Across all journals in the index, we would see the JCI would roughly average out to 1. The average JCI across all journals should be roughly 1, because expected citation is based on an average of citations. And then you look at the citation performance of a journal against that average. A JCI over 1 means that you are performing better than the average citation component, or your articles are performing better than the average citations for their type. And a JCI less than 1 means that you are below the normalized average of citations for your at your journal level. You still see that although the 3 flagship indexes, which are selected by competitive citation analysis, show similar average JCIs, the ESCI average JCI will still be lower because it's not based on selection for competitive citation performance. Tom will go into that. To get a quick look at the big top line differences between the journal impact factor and the JCI, the journal impact factor uses 1 year of citations from all content to all document types, and it analyzes that to the journal for the previous 2 years. The JCI shows a much higher volume of citations, 4-fold the volume of citations, and it limits only to articles and reviews, not including citations to editorials or letters to the editor or unlinked materials that are cited in the journal. So these have subtly different characteristics in terms of the type of data that they use in order to capture that normalized performance for the JCI, as well as the journal level performance for the JIF. The JIF represents the journal as a whole. The JCI is looking solely at the academic or the citation performance of the scholarly content only. A summary of their similarities and differences. They are both aggregated measures of journal citation performance, which is why the ESCI journals still will generally show lower JCIs, just as they show lower journal impact factors. In both metrics, all of the WAS core, journals, books, and proceedings, contribute to the impact. Both of them are time limited to relatively recent content. 10 years ago, the journal may have published an article that is still influencing the field, but that will not be part of the recent performance of that journal. So that isn't included in either of these metrics. We want the metrics to be responsive to changes that are made within the recent few years. Otherwise, you'd wait forever for the normalization to adjust to significant changes or improvements you've made in the journal, or its global impact, its attraction of audiences, a new and dynamic editor who really changes the direction of the journal. We don't want that to take 10 years to show up in a performance metric. We want the metrics to be more responsive. Both journal impact factor and JCI will provide robust ranking within a category. But because of the normalization, which is only by size for the journal impact factor, the JCI will actually provide a robust ranking between categories. There's still some caution should be applied because they are still citation metrics. And so there's some little slip of journals with or categories and topics with very low citation ranges, as well as very small populations. They tend to get a little more volatile in the calculation of the JCI. So use that with some care in very small categories, as well as in the comparison of large, robust, heavily cited categories and very tiny, low cited categories. Use a little bit of caution. It's not perfect. There is some difference in the time and some difference in the cited work. I think I've covered that, I hope, adequately. I will provide you with these links. We have a JCR 2021 reference guide. We intend to update that annually to make sure that it is an overview of how to and what is in the JCR, how to use and what is in the JCR. We also have a blog post and a discussion paper on the much more specific to how the JCI is calculated and where that came from and how we developed that, and what our particular application of the JCI is. I hope I have covered what you need, and I hope I haven't talked too awfully fast. Scheduling made easy. I need to stop sharing. There we go.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your
Sure.
valuable information with us, because JCI was something that everyone was curious about it from the beginning. So thank you again. So Tom, you there? You're muted, I guess.
I
Yeah.
am there. Hello. Yes, I'm going to be happy
Hi
to share
again.
my hello again. And thank you again for having me today. I am going to share my screen in just a moment.
All right.
And while I am doing that, I want to thank Marie for very kindly sharing what she knows about JCI and how it was made with all of us. All right, so I'm going to start. Okay, and I believe you can see the slide on screen.
Yes.
Excellent. So hello, everyone. My name is Tom Chavarella. I have been brought on by the Galenos team and have been working with them for the past few months on topics related to editorial quality. We are talking today specifically about Web of Science, but that's not the only thing that I'm working with the team on. We're talking about just journal quality in general, but we understand that JCI being new is something that you need to know about, and journal impact factor not being new and still something that's prestigious, something you'd like to know a little bit more about too. But in between there sits something very important, and that's content quality and editorial quality. So what I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about is quality in that regard. So before I jump in, I want to just clarify to everyone that Web of Science is not a single thing. It's a platform of over 20 individual databases. And if you logged on to your university library right now, or if you're at a publisher and you look at your Web of Science, everybody might see a different variation of Web of Science, depending on what your company or what your university is subscribed to. But what we're focusing on, and what Marie was focusing on when she talked about the Journal Citation Reports, the JCR, is what we call our core collection. And that used to be, for impact factor purposes, only the Science Citation Index and the Social Sciences Index. As Marie explained, for JCI purposes, we've expanded the JCR to include the Arts and Humanities Index and the Emerging Sources Index. There's also citation activity from our conferences and books that go into the metrics you will see in the JCR. So how does this content get into Web of Science and ultimately into the JCR? It is largely a human process. We used technology at Web of Science when I was there for 4 years. We had a mix of people and tech. How do you triage? How do you take what's most important, what's most quality, what's most high impact, and get that in front of the editors, the human team that we employ all over the world to make these journal selections, and get them into the databases? And that team is varied. They're very smart people based all over the world. And there is a team. So please know this, when you're sending something into the Web of Science, there is a team of people, full-time employees, whose role it is to nothing but evaluate this content and to put it into the places where it should be. The criteria those editors use come down to 28 points. Overwhelmingly, 24 of those 28 points are based on quality, the quality of the journal. Impact is, of course, very important, and we do know that most publishers and most journals are seeking to get that journal impact factor. But there is no impact without quality. That is why there are so many more quality criteria set up. And also, just having quality at one point does not mean that a journal stays forever. A journal has to show consistent quality to stay inside of the Web of Science. Certainly, we know that it needs to show impact, to get an impact factor. But with the advent of JCI, journals are going to have to show quality to maintain that ranking as well. It does come to pass every year that the editorial team will need to look at journals that have been indexed and perhaps remove them either from a specific database or remove them from the Web of Science entirely based upon their quality or their impact. So most likely a journal is going to start its indexing life in the Emerging Sources Index, and ideally it shows enough impact where it can move into one of those impact factor databases. But thanks to the advent of the Journal Citation Indicator, JCI, you still get a high quality metric, you still get visibility inside of the JCR, even if you don't have impact. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the editorial process, what the editors use and how they flow a journal through this three-step workflow to decide where a journal is going to be. The first step is what's called initial triage. This is the very basic content of a journal. Its title, its ISSN, the most standard things that a journal should have. If it doesn't have any of these very basic things, the editors aren't even going to start an evaluation. And we know that on this call, most people are affiliated with, and all of the good Galenos journals are certainly passing this without a second thought. These are all the basics and standards of what a good journal should have. The good thing is that if for whatever reason you don't have this information, it doesn't condemn a journal. If an editor sees something missing, they can reach out to the publisher and say, you really need to include this. And once you do, you can be on the path toward an evaluation. That's when you move into what's called editorial triage. This is going to be a little more in depth because now the Web of Science editors aren't looking at just the framework of the journal, they're looking at the specifics of the journal. They are looking to see the metadata, the quality of the English language. Are you publishing on time? The Web of Science is a product, and that product is purchased by people who expect content to appear on a regular basis. And if you, the journal, are not publishing on a regular basis, that could be a strike against you in being indexed inside of the Web of Science. So there's a number of these things that the editors will look at as a part of that editorial triage step. From there, it would move on to the third step, which is both quality and impact. And quality takes a lot of the time. This is where the editorial team is going to look even more deeply. So not just the metadata of the articles and is the English language right, but who's on your editorial board? Do you have the right experts on your board? Are you publishing content from the right experts in your field? What is the peer review process like for your journal? Are you being transparent about it? The Web of Science team doesn't say you have to do it single blind or double blind, or you need to open up all of the comments, but we do expect the transparency. They do want to see that you're being honest with the public and honest with your researchers and honest with the editors about how you're conducting the peer review. And that's a huge concern at this step because unfortunately, fraud is a concern the world over. Paper mills are a concern the world over. So the robustness of the peer review process definitely gets a big look, as do many other similar quality measures at this step of the process. After looking at the quality, the editors are also going to assess for impact. Now, I should point out that at this point, most journals are not going to have impact, especially if they're new journals. Most journals could be of high quality, but they just don't have the citation activity or the presence in their field yet to have impact. So not a lot of journals are going to pass both quality and impact at the same time. This was a bit of a problem in the past because you could get accepted for the Emerging Sources Index, which was a wonderful thing, but it didn't give you a lot of public recognition in terms of benchmarking against other journals in your field. And that's where JCI has now come in. So those are the three steps of the process, but I'm going to focus, as I had mentioned earlier, mostly on quality, because Quality is what is going to get your journal indexed in the Web of Science. And if you're indexed in the Web of Science in that core collection, again, probably the emerging sources index is where a journal begins its indexing life, you're going to get that journal citation indicator. And that new metric is going to give you an exposure inside of the JCR and give you, as Marie pointed out, a better accounting of what you are as a journal against journals that have impact factors and journals that don't. So this is a modified version of a slide that Marie had in her presentation. This is something that's available publicly, and I too will send out some links and some slides if you'd like to go and see this afterwards. But this is the rubric that the Web of Science editors have built to show what happens with a journal and those 3 steps, from initial triage to editorial triage to the editorial evaluation. And what I just discussed on my prior slides was what's in this red box here, the quality criteria. And again, in that first gray bar on the left, most journals don't have to worry about that. But if something is missing or the editors aren't sure, they'll ask you or the publisher to sort it out, and then the evaluation can start. Then we get into the second gray box, which is quality. But what I'm really going to spend the rest of my time on is on the third gray box, which I've outlined in green here, because those are the differentiators. You know, if the editors have a choice between 2 journals of quality and they're not sure which ones they might want to put in, they're going to lean most heavily on these parts of the quality criteria. And there's 8 steps here that we're going to take a look at. Again, if you don't pass this editorial step, generally a journal's not going to get another evaluation, probably for 2 more years. So you certainly want to have an eye on these next 8 pieces so you don't have to suffer through being told we're not going to take you right now and then having to wait a good long while. So the first of those is having a look at the editorial board. And the Web of Science editors are going to look at your board, and they're going to look at the size of it and who's on it and from where in the world they are and where else have they published. Geographic diversity can be very important, especially if you're calling yourself International Journal of, and you only have editorial board members from a single university or a single country or a single region. You want to make sure that the mix of who you have on your board is going to play into what the aims and scope of the journal are. They're also going to take a look at what's called the validity of statements. This is where they're going to take a look at your transparency. Where is your ethics statement? Where is your plagiarism statement? Where is your peer review statement? What are you showing the world about who you are as a journal or a publisher? And how are you adhering to proper standards? Are you mentioning groups like COPE that, you know, make sure and have a very robust set of guidelines for what ethics should be and what openness should be? Are you following those guidelines? The Web of Science editors will look for that. Peer review, one of the things I had mentioned before. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do the peer review. Could be single blind, it could be double blind, but you do need to show that you're doing it. You do need to make it clear what your peer review process is. If it's murky in any way, this is a real red flag to the Web of Science team that maybe this journal isn't ready to be indexed. Something else is something that the editorial board calls content relevance. This is a way of guarding against inappropriate publications. A lot of journals, especially open access journals, which can still be a bit wild, will publish papers just to get the APCs, just to bring the money in, even if certain papers aren't within the aims and scope of the journal. The Web of Science editors will definitely look to see what has the publication practice and throughput been for your journal. Did all of a sudden your publications spike? Were you publishing, say, 30 articles a year and it went up to 200 or 300? What does that say about the quality of what you're publishing? What does it say about the editorial review, the peer review? What does that say about the topics you're publishing in? So big spikes in activity and articles that don't match the aims and scope, if a journal is publishing those, probably not going to meet the quality criteria of Web of Science. Grant support is a big one too. Not only are you publishing the right kinds of articles, but are you publishing articles from researchers who have grant support? That's a big differentiator for the Web of Science team. It shows that there's a third party out there that this author or this institution that the author is affiliated with, or that the publisher is affiliated with, has also vetted this researcher, this publisher, this journal, and has decided that it's doing proper work and is giving it some grant support. It's not a matter of dollar value. It's not a matter of who the grant comes from, though certainly there are institutions in the world where if we see you're funded by them, that stands out. But seeing the grant support, while it's not required, it is definitely a mark of quality. It has shown the Web of Science team that you've gone out to others and that they already assess you to be of quality too. Community standards, again, I had mentioned earlier, are you adhering to the norms of the field that you publish in? Are you adhering to the norms of, say, a third-party body like COPE, something that oversees the way that journals are published, but also keeping in mind that some journals intentionally look to buck trends or look to set trends. They look to be a bit contrary. Perhaps a journal is intentionally going after papers that will be the devil's advocate, as you will. If that's the kind of journal you are, if you're looking to publish those kinds of provocative papers, definitely make that clear inside of the aims and scope of your journal, because those papers tend to not be as highly cited. And again, citation activity is not everything. There are many more quality aspects of a journal than just the citations. But if your journal is taking a position to be something other than what other journals in the field are, make sure that's in the aims and scope so the editors understand that you're coming at this topic from a different angle. Author distribution is something else that the Web of Science team is going to look at, much like the editorial board distribution. Again, if you're calling yourself International Journal of, we're going to expect to see a lot of authors from all over the world. Whereas for some of the Galenos journals, they are Turkish Journal of. Okay, the Web of Science editors would expect most of the authors are going to come from Turkey or come from the region. Perhaps most of the editorial board members will be from the country or from the region. So again, how the journal is named, what it professes as its aims and scope, the Web of Science team will then try to match that up against what is actually published inside of the journal. And then the last bit here is going to be what's called appropriate citations. So not only is it appropriate to publish the right authors and appropriate to have the right editorial boards, in order to guard against gaming the metrics in the JCR, the editors will also look to see that the papers are citing appropriate topics. We will expect to see that certain journals are going to cite certain other journals, or some topic areas will cite from other topic areas. But if a cancer journal is citing an archaeology journal, there better be a real good reason why that's happening. If a cancer journal is citing some kind of a journal in technology, engineering perhaps, that might have an overlap. If it's about a new device, a new test, a new scanning procedure. So the editors will definitely look at not just, did this cancer journal of yours publish the right cancer authors and have the right cancer peer reviewers and the right cancer affiliated ed board members, but are you also citing topics in the articles that you publish that make sense with what the journal is supposed to be about? So that is the end of my talk, but there are plenty of other links that I can share with you and that you will see if you'd like to read up on how the editors do their work. And when it comes time to submit a journal, there's also some information on that as well. But also you could reach out to me. You could also reach out to the Galenos team about the proper composition of an editorial board, of a journal, and of an article. And so with that, I will end my presentation, and I'll thank you all very much for your time.
Very good. Thank you for the useful information. Actually, you both touched on the parts that almost every participant is curious about. But anyways, let's continue with our question and answer section if you'd like to. And let's get started with our first question. Does journal impact factor take case reports into account?
Fine, I guess.
Yes.
Does it take case reports into account? Well, I'll say that there are two pieces that we have to consider. And one is, are there references in that case report? Those are part of the calculation of citation count. We index all material, all substantive items from the journal. So if that case report contains references, those references are going to be analyzed as part of the JCR. For whether or not a case report is considered an article or a citable item, we develop those priorities or those categories of items journal by journal. So when we begin indexing a journal, we will take a look at what does that case report present? Is it a single case with one X-ray and a differential diagnosis? Or is it a multi-case discussion of current clinical practice in a field? The latter would be a citable item. The former, 1 page long, 5 references, would not be considered generally part of the scholarly engagement with the literature. So the case report, whether it's counted, will depend on what it looks like, both bibliographically and bibliometrically. You can tell for any given journal, if the case reports are given the document type article in Web of Science, they are counted as part of what would be the journal impact factor denominator, or what would be the JCI denominator as well.
Okay, thank you. Let's continue with the second question. How is JCI calculated? Can we calculate it by ourselves?
In principle, you could calculate it by yourself. Some of the limitations on being able to do that. I love transparent metrics, so it bothers me that we can't offer a prefab data set that would allow that calculation. But the calculation is based on the day of the JCR extraction. So the level of citation at that time is critical. The metric does not continue to evolve, although the article can continue to evolve. The metric itself is based on, as I said, that normalized citation count according to the expected rate in the category. I would not say it is practical to attempt that calculation by yourself now. We are working towards making the contributing metrics at the article level more transparent in the JCR. I would encourage, if you have access to the insights, benchmarks and analytics, article level, category normalized citation indicators are present there as well. Again, they would not be the same as the JCR data set. So very difficult to calculate that metric based on any externally facing data, because the data that are externally facing evolve continuously, but the JCR is a single point of extraction. That's why if you look at the citation count of an article in the impact factor, it's different in JCR because that is only looking at a specific window of citation activity than it would be in Web of Science. So I wish, but we're getting closer.
Thank you. There's one more question from Taner Kemal Erda from the editor-in-chief of Turkish Archives of Otolaryngology. Can we trust Web of Science editors completely? Are they really objective during their evaluations of the scholar journals of different countries?
I'm going to, Tom, yep. I need to take that one. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in there.
Please do.
That's where I began my career, as a selections editor. And that is such, the objectivity of that exercise is such a high priority for us, as well as acknowledgement of the necessity to represent the global conversation around scholarly literature. So we are, that is a matter that we both train our editors towards, as well as having me around still to enforce that. That's part of my job, is to make sure that we maintain an absolute objectivity, not just to the geographic origin of the journal, but to the topics as well as to the publishers. The fact is, we will not consider with any more seriousness a journal from a large publisher than a journal from a small publisher, a journal from an international publisher or a journal from a regional publisher. The criteria are applied at the journal level, journal by journal, and if we find someone unable to apply those criteria objectively, that person would not maintain their job as a journal selections editor. It's simply not acceptable that we would not have that objectivity. Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry. I feel very passionately about that.
No, and you are exactly the right person to answer that question. So yes, I will say that having worked alongside Marie for 4 years, everything that she just said, I have seen in person every day, and it is absolutely true.
Yes, absolutely. So there's one more question. What is the function of 5-year impact factor?
Me again.
Yes, I get.
Well, the function of a 5-year impact factor is partly to use a broader set of data and provide a more stable year-on-year metric. All those features of responsiveness and recency that are part of the journal impact factor with 2 years, the 5-year impact factor acquires a little more stability, as well as containing a larger quantity of both cited materials as well as citations. So it gives it a little more ballast in a strong wind, so to speak. So it will capture a larger amount of citation activity for journals, particularly that have a long span of cited material, particularly in social sciences and other fields where the literature doesn't turn over quite as rapidly. That will represent a larger amount of their total citation activity. There are some fields where the literature is so rapid and so responsive that you'll see a higher 2-year impact factor than 5-year impact factor. But for many journals where the citation of their content goes up and then stays up for a sustained number of years, more of that activity is then captured in the 5-year impact factor, and they would maintain a higher 5-year metric. It's a way to start thinking a little more judiciously about the time that it takes for some fields to achieve citations.
Excellent answer. Thank you. The other question is, what do you think about editorial board members citing articles, which is about self-citations, I guess? Is this true or ethical? Can you evaluate it in terms of ESCI?
So in terms of editorial board members citing articles from the journal itself, I would think there's no prohibition against it, but certainly the volume, the level of citations will be looked at, and certainly the size of the discipline will be looked at too. You know, we know that there are some niche areas where there are only maybe 7 or 8 journals in that area. And it would stand to reason that a lot of the editorial board members will also be authors in that field and will publish in certain journals and will perhaps cite each other. So there is definitely some consideration given to the size of the field or the specificity of the topic that's being discussed. Some things only have a certain number of experts. But as the field widens, as the number of journals grows, it will certainly raise the attention of the editors if they consistently see editorial board members citing themselves or citing their own articles from their journals that they sit on the board of, or publishing elsewhere but citing journals from a journal they do sit on the board of. There's no threshold. It isn't as if we can say, you know, keep that activity below X amount, because if we said that, everybody would keep their activity below X amount. So it really does have to be a judgment call on the editorial board's count, and also for the publisher too, to understand this and to watch this.
Thank you. There's a question from Eray Çalışkan, and he says, Google Scholar citations are usually higher than JCI or Journal Impact Factor. So selection of core material seems to be the main denominator input indicator of outcome. What is the criteria for core material?
Well, Google Scholar is purely algorithmic. I mean, you're just getting whatever they can scrape and they're aggregating that. Whereas Web of Science is curated. It has a team. There is a dedicated set of editors. Nothing gets into Web of Science without an editor evaluating it and assessing it first. And that's not what you're going to see with Google Scholar. So yes, Google Scholar will tend to be more generous in its counting. This happens with H-index as well. We used to get a lot of questions about, I went to Google Scholar and I saw my H-index was this, and I went to Web of Science and it was much lower. Why is that? The data set is different, and I will go out on a limb and say that the data set for Google Scholar is dirtier. It is not as clean as the Web of Science data set because of the work of the Web of Science editors.
One way that I have discussed that is if I need a recommendation for a cardiologist, I could stand on a street corner and get 100 opinions in 5 minutes. Or I could call the hospital and ask for their opinion.
There's a question from Ayhan Kanat. What is the reason to use of Web of Science the enriched cited references term?
Repeat, I did not understand. Sorry.
What is the reason to use of Web of Science the enriched cited references term?
Okay, that's new. Good for you. Enriched cited references is a move forward to understanding more of the fact that a reference is not always merely a count, but it is also an indication of scholarly debt. Why am I referencing this material? So materials that are referenced in the materials and methods, they may be canonical descriptions of a specific technique. Materials that are referenced in the introduction are generally background and setting the context in which your research is taking place. Materials referenced in discussion are where you will really test your interpretation against the surrounding literature, either in support of or in contrast to the established literature on that topic and the established interpretation on that topic. So we are stepping towards the kind of nuanced interpretation of a reference relationship that, honestly, it's empowering the thing that you always do when you read an article and look at the references. When you see a reference in the introduction, you're having that context around that reference. When you see a reference in the method, you have that context around the reference. So we're looking at where in the article, as well as the type of reference that it is indicating. It's a little related to sentiment analysis, but a little lighter than that. There are other efforts. This has been a bibliometrics goal for many, many, many years, is to try to understand, why am I referencing this versus that? Why am I could be referencing something and saying, I'm going to show you a contrasting explanation for these data. That scientist assumed it was this mechanism. I think it's something different. That's an important distinction between I am referencing to show how I have proved this other model. So that being able to understand more of that context is that first step towards enriched cited references, is a step in that direction.
Thank you. I think it's the last question for now. Do you have any suggestions to increase the citation rates? For example, would you recommend increasing the number of article types, such as case reports or a letter to the editors of scientific quality that are likely to be cited?
Well, the first thing that we would always say is that you have to publish for your audience and not for the Web of Science. So whatever article types, whatever pieces of information, whatever items are of greatest need and interest to the audience of your journal, you should focus on that first. In terms of drawing more citations, there's a lot of work you can do inside of the JCR to look at if there's a certain level of citation you want to achieve and you know that there's a competing journal that already has that, you can use the JCR to look at, well, what is that journal doing that my journal is not? And it certainly boils down to the selection of the content. That journal is probably selecting more highly cited papers from better authors, more diverse authors. Again, is it the grant funding, and are people seeing that and they're getting cited? So there is no one way to achieve higher citation counts, but the best thing to do is to use the JCR and all of the data that's available and look at where you want to be. What journal do you most want to be like? What quartile do you want to see your journal in? And using that objective data from the JCR, try to see where your journal is doing well in comparison to that other journal and where it might need to change itself.
I would like to give a supporting citation to Tom.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you so much for your believable answers and presentations. It looks like we've covered all of our questions. Yes, Mary and Tom, is there anything else you want to cover before a wrap up?
Something that we've always told editors who have asked us, how do I increase my journal impact factor or my citation rate? And this goes right back to, I heard Dr. Garfield say this, and that is, publish the best articles you can, treat your authors well, and publish quickly. A good journal will attract its necessary audience. I realize that that's a little naive, is to think that coverage in Web of Science and getting a journal impact factor does not influence that. But I have often said myself that the journal impact factor is a good metric, but a bad master. So serve your field as best you can. Publish a literature that your audience considers necessary and engage with them in a way that continues to make your content valuable.
Great, thank you. Before ending, I would also like to remind you that a recorded version of the webinar will be available on Galenos YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time. So thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nihan, and thank you to the Galenos team for setting this up.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.